Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Aisha Subarkash. During the U.S. presidential campaign, Joe Biden made clear that his Middle East policy would be drastically different than his predecessor. And after his first full week in office, Biden is starting to show what that policy will be. Allies and adversaries alike are now seeing dramatic shifts from the past 4 years. Gone are the days of diplomacy by tweet and one-sided relationships. President Biden has restored relations with the Palestinian Authority, which were all but cut off by Donald Trump. The action signals a return to a more balanced approach towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It'll also mean the return of U.S. aid to the Palestinians and Washington's reaffirmed support for a two-state solution. U.S. allies Saudi Arabia and the UAE also got a wake-up call after the Biden administration said it was posing a string of weapons deals worth tens of billions of dollars. Included are the sale of the advanced F-35 fighter jets, which was signed on Trump's last full day in office. Newly confirmed U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also made clear that U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen was over. So, in just a week, we've seen a major pivot in U.S. policy. How far will it go, and what other countries are set to see changes? To discuss the latest, joining me from New York is Mark Meirowitz. He is a professor at the State University of New York who specializes in U.S. foreign policy, and Dalia Fahmy, who is a Middle East analyst and an associate professor of political science at LIU Brooklyn. Hi, Dalia. Hi, Mark. Welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Dalia, in a latest move, Biden administration has halted the weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. And the United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, will not be able to buy F-35 jets for the time being. What is your take on that?
It's not exactly that they can't buy. It's that the sale is going to be reviewed because it went through just hours before the inauguration of the current President Biden. But I think what we need to look at is that the political landscape in the Middle East has shifted significantly since President Biden was vice president. While he is no stranger to the Middle East, and he has in his long career, he's visited many countries in many capacities, the political landscape has significantly shifted. If we think about, for example, the pillars of stability in the Middle East, historically, they've been, for example, Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Today, Saudi Arabia has become a pillar of instability for the United States, especially in this protracted war in Yemen. And so what we're seeing in this first week and just in the first day of the new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, is that they're putting these countries on notice, is that there's a new status quo. And while both of these countries are having several internal changes, we're seeing that their footprint in the Middle East is waning, while countries like Turkey, Qatar, and even the UAE, in a certain extent, they're increasing in their footprint. The so-called normalization between the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Israel, brokered by the United States under the previous administration, is also shifting a little in this first week. And the Iran nuclear program,
Yes.
the new discussions on possible negotiations of sanctions, the rising power of the UAE. It's a very different Middle East in the past 4 years.
Yeah, and it's just only been a week since he is at the White House as president. So, Mark, what kind of a message did the U.S. send to those countries, particularly, in your opinion?
I don't see a very precipitous shift in policy. I'm going to be candid about it. If you listen to Tony Blinken and also to Jen Psaki in their press conferences, you have to listen very carefully. When Tony Blinken spoke about Saudi Arabia in connection with Yemen and sanctioning the Houthis, he called Saudi Arabia our partner.
Yes.
And when Jen Psaki spoke about our policy towards China and other countries, they talked about strategic patience. And in the hearings, when Tony Blinken was asked about the Abraham Accords, and the senators questioning him, bipartisan, were supportive of it, he said in that hearing he was fine with it. I'm going to paraphrase it. And he also said it again in his press conference. I don't think the United States is going to shift precipitously against the Abraham Accords at the present time. Mm-hmm. Where the real focus is going to be honestly on domestic issues like the pandemic and the economy. That is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if you're turning to foreign policy, the main issues there are China and Russia. But if you listen to the tone of how it's being discussed, it's all about we're competitors. But Biden reached out to the Russians, worked up a re-up of the deal. The United States is not making any precipitous steps in foreign policy to upend what occurred. I mean, they may look at it down the road, but not until they solve the pandemic.
Yes.
So in terms of the F-35s and the UAE and all of that, I would say that, yes, they're going to look at these arrangements, but the Middle East has changed in the sense that the countries that made the deal with Israel were focused on their fear of Iran. And
Yes.
as long as Iran is a threat, there's going to be glue together for that deal. The Iranian deal, I don't know if it's going to ever happen because the Iranians are being very intransigent on whether they're going to agree to more than just the Iran nuclear deal. That is the tricky part.
All
President
right.
Biden says he wants to do it.
All right. So, Dalia, Biden also wants to end the war in Yemen. Is it as simple as ending military support to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, or it would take a more diplomatically active United States in the region?
What has happened in U.S.-Saudi relations over the past couple of years is that we need to rethink how we look at, for example, the United States. It's not just the executive. In Washington, we have the president, we have the Pentagon, but we also have military apparatus, CENTCOM. And there has been a division between the way they see U.S.-Saudi relations in the past couple of years. And one indicator of that is how upset many generals of the U.S. military are in the way with which the United States has allowed itself to get into a protracted conflict in Yemen that is not in U.S. strategic interest. And so what I believe we're going to see very quickly is that a return to what is U.S. military interest in the region? How is U.S. military footprint going to be redefined? And how can U.S.-Saudi relations return to U.S. strategic interest rather than allowing the current leader of, or so-called current leader of Saudi Arabia,
Yes.
MBS, to push the United States in directions it strategically does not want to go into. And so what I think you will continue to see is a reduction of the U.S. footprint in Yemen. And we're starting to see that conversation begin with the new Secretary of State in terms of the designations of the Houthis. And so I do believe that there will be a significant shift in the way with which the status quo behavior, technically a little bit quid pro quo, the past 4 years, will be redefined between the United States and Saudi Arabia.
So, Mark, what happens when the U.S. administration declassifies the intelligence report into the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi? Where does this leave the Crown Prince?
Look, let's be realistic now. Let's be candid. Saudi Arabia is a longstanding ally of the United States. That's not going to change. And in terms of the military aspect of this, we have civilian control of the military, and the president controls the military. He's the commander in chief, and the defense secretary is a general. That's true. But so what the military commanders think or don't think, I don't believe is pivotal. I think what is pivotal here is the relationship with Saudi Arabia. And if you look at the Congress, I am not expecting going forward, again, any great upheavals in these relationships. As far as the murder of Khashoggi, that is like many other disclosures that we've had that kind of rocked the boat. But at the end of the day, if you go back in history, you have the AWACS, the Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a longstanding ally. And as far as the Houthis and Yemen, that conflict needs to end. But again, is it the United States that's going to get in there and get involved there? I think not. Because right now, as I said, the immediate primacy of the foreign policy begins at home. I'm quoting Professor Richard Haas's book. That's what we have to fix now. So the United States is not going to have military footprints and military involvements in other parts in the world. Maybe that's what might come down the road. But right now, everything is about stability and patience. I heard Jen Psaki say that word patience so many times that I got convinced that the Biden administration, even if you listen to Tony Blinken's, the tone of Tony Blinken's comments, those comments are very clearly not involved in intervention. And the military, again, is under the control of the civilian authorities and not on their own making decisions as to what they want to do, I don't think.
Yeah, so just like Saudi Arabia, Dalia, Egypt is a longtime ally of the United States. Would it be a new course or business as usual?
since President Biden was candidate Biden, and throughout his history in the Senate, he has been talking about the redefinition of how we look at strategic interests using the language of democracy and human rights. And we've seen this reinforced in the past week, and even on Saudi Arabia, not just on Egypt, where the new Secretary of State says that there will be he said, a review of the entirety of the relationship. And while we might not see dramatic shifts, this language matters a lot, because in the Middle East, you have several audiences. You have the political leadership of these countries, but you also have the people. And there are many interests that need to be kind of navigated in this regard. And while the pandemic will be and continue to be the primary focus here in the United States, countries like Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt will continue to expect support as they have to get back on their feet during the pandemic. And so these questions about domestic politics versus international relations and foreign policy, we can't see them as separate circles. They're very concentric in many ways. And the pandemic's effect on the Middle East will affect the stability of a country like Egypt, which is teetering, especially in the 10th anniversary of the Arab Spring, on a country where 70% of the population is on the brink of poverty. Add to that the pandemic, it's not a country that's going to be able to sustain the status quo stability in the region vis-a-vis Libya on one end and Sudan and the Nile damming on the other. Separate from the fact that the UAE's footprint is increasing and Russia's footprint is increasing right on its doorstep in Libya. And so the region cannot be ignored because of domestic politics. The region is extremely could be seen as on the brink of a redefinition of the status quo. Saudi Arabia and Egypt are no longer the pillars of stability. Yes, they are U.S. strategic partners. We need them for things like Camp David, flyover rights, Sinai, Suez Canal, as well as security and safety of the state of Israel.
So who will be the strategic partner?
I think the strategic partners are going to be redefined in the Gulf. It's not primarily Saudi Arabia, it's increasingly the UAE, and with the lifting of the GCC's sanctions on Qatar, increasingly Qatar. Turkey will play an increasing role in the region, as it has been for the past 5 to 6 years. But the relationships will be redefined because in the past 4 years, Russia has been able to increase its footprint. And so U.S.-Turkey relations will be redefined in that regard. Especially in the sales of arms from Russia to Turkey, but also in terms of Turkey's increasing footprint in Syria and in Libya. Russia's increasing footprint in Syria and in Libya, which could possibly destabilize aspect of U.S. relations in that part of the world. And so while we can talk about domestic politics, we can't ignore the changing status quo that's shifted dramatically in the past 4 years, and will call for a reconsideration of the way with which the United States has been treating its allies in the Arab Middle East.
So now adopting a more balanced approach towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Mark, is a two-state solution possible now? And where does this leave Israel and, of course, Netanyahu?
Right. Look, again, to be realistic, I don't believe that if you're making a list of the primary issues, the Middle East is not high on that list. Regrettably, I mean, it should be. It's not going to be. The main issues are China and Russia. And even there, the United States is not being very aggressive. Iran, obviously, the nuclear deal, that's kind of the pivot of the United States policy right now. About Saudi Arabia and Egypt, I don't see any great change as far as Israel and the Palestinians. The Israel-Palestinian issue, I'm afraid, will not be high on that agenda because of the Abraham Accords. Listening to Tony Blinken on that, and if you listen to the hearings, the discussion of this issue was relegated to just a few minutes and a commitment to a two-state solution, but not really a pivotal discussion in terms of America's foreign policy. Now, about Turkey, obviously, Turkish-U.S. relations is very, very important. We need to have good relations with Turkey, and we need to get over this Russian intervention in the region and try to see what we can do to limit Russia's intervention. We can see the nefarious actions of Russia, and we just have to be very careful, and Turkey should be very careful about its continued alliance with Russia.
All right.
Its trajectory is with the United States, not with Russia. Russia is not a faithful partner, I don't think. And I think anyway.
Okay, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk, and please stay safe there. For years, when it came to piracy threats, the Horn of Africa off the Somali coast would top the list. But now the Gulf of Guinea off the western coast of Africa has become the new hotspot for kidnappings on the high seas. The violent seizure of commercial ships in the region is growing at an alarming rate, with the most recent victim being the Turkish vessel, the MV Mozart. The ship was attacked 185 kilometers northwest of the island nation of Sao Tome and Principe in the Gulf of Guinea on January the 23rd. Nigerian pirates took 15 Turkish crew members hostage. An Azerbaijani engineer was reportedly killed during the takeover. Turkish authorities said rescue operations are underway. And this wasn't the first incident for Turkey's merchant fleet. Back in 2019, pirates seized a Turkish ship in similar fashion in the same area. All 10 crew members were eventually released. So how dangerous is the Gulf of Guinea? And what security precautions are nations taking? And to answer that, joining me from Istanbul is Faruk Dogan. He is a retired Naval Staff Colonel and Maritime Security Analyst, and Scott Edwards, who is a researcher at the University of Bristol and lead author at Safe Seas, a group that investigates maritime security. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Scott, why has West Africa become the new piracy spot, and why the Gulf of Guinea is considered the most dangerous sea in the world for piracy?
Yeah, so there's always been quite significant issues in the Gulf of Guinea in terms of maritime insecurity and the management of waters in the Gulf of Guinea. And one of the problems that we're seeing at the moment, in the Gulf of Guinea particularly, is higher levels of violence, but also an increasing sophistication as well. And the attack over the past few days kind of demonstrates this, as pirates are able to target ships at distance further from shore. So you have this kind of twofold problem whereby attacks are becoming more sophisticated and violent, but also other hotspots or traditional hotspots, like places like Somalia and Southeast Asia, are also being managed possibly to a better degree, or they're kind of being controlled in a more stronger way. So these are kind of declining as significant issues. At the same time, the Gulf of Guinea is kind of increasing as an issue.
Yeah, so Faruk, in the latest incident, 15 Turkish crew members were taken hostage. What do you make of it? Are sailors' lives in danger? If any harm was done to them, which country would be held accountable? How the system works? Could you talk to us about that?
Okay. According to the news, the crew members have taken to some place, to an unknown place in the land. Mm-hmm. Up to now, there is no contact with them. But as far as I know, the system works like that. They find a contact point and try to contact with the governmental staff in order to get some ransom for the lives of our crew. Yeah. So our government members are waiting for some stuff. Also, they are using their embassy members in that area in order to contact with the pirates.
Okay, so Scott, what kind of measures should be employed by coastal states and regional organizations to stem such attacks?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely lessons here that can be learned from other areas like the West Indian Ocean, where you saw quite a successful response to piracy. For a start, like one of the kind of key areas would be for states to kind of take ownership of the issue and have this kind of local ownership, so they are able to kind of coordinate better and create like a multi-stakeholder institution. I think similar to the contact group for piracy off the coast of Somalia, which is now seen as a very successful model for this. And this is particularly important because one of the issues that we have in the Gulf of Guinea that we didn't necessarily have to such a strong degree off the coast of Somalia was problems of sovereignty, which makes it more difficult for international actors to respond without kind of really strong local ownership and this kind of multi-stakeholder approach to improve coordination, to improve information sharing. And one thing that international agencies could do in this is to help kind of develop capacity for local states. So providing equipment and training for across the board for like enforcement, patrols, and prosecution and things like that.
So far, how has the Operation Atalanta helped reduce the number of such attacks and incidents in the Horn of Africa and around Somalia? And could a similar operation be launched in this region?
Yeah, in Somalia region, it's not the only Operation Atalanta by the European Union, but also NATO with Operation Ocean Shield, and most significantly, the coalition forces, which is called Counter-Piracy Task Force 151. And totally, there were almost 35 nations and more than 40 ships and assets in that small area, comparing to this Gulf of Guinea, worked together in cooperation, and they provided harmony and synchronization. So because of this effort, piracy has been diminished by time, and for the last 2 years, it's almost zero. But in this area, we cannot say the same thing because there are only some kind of limited regional efforts, and on the sea there are not capable ships, capable crews by the navies or security forces, and we are looking for some international interest or international attention to this area. Fortunately, there are some good news that NATO is began to provide a new initiation, which is called the Southern Strategic Direction for South Hub. And also yesterday, the European Union declared that they're gonna establish a new concept for this area. It's apparent that they are gonna send a kind of force or some kind of initiative in that area. And I believe that this kind of international initiative will improve the counter-piracy efforts, and it will go down. The numbers will go down.
So, Scott, International Maritime Bureau recommends that the ships to remain at least 250 nautical miles from the coast at all times to stem possible attacks. Do you think it is viable solution, or more needs to be done in this respect?
I think more needs to be done in this respect. I guess one of the kind of things that we saw in Somalia was the establishment of these high-risk areas and corridors where international patrols were able to assist ships in certain areas. And I think for this to work, there would potentially need to be a kind of similar thing in place. But as discussed before, that this is extremely difficult because of these issues of sovereignty. But within the Gulf of Guinea, I think this is a viable starting point, at least, because especially until now, a lot of the attacks have actually been taken place in territorial waters or the exclusive economic zones. So it shows that pirates are not yet able to consistently kind of attack ships further away from shore. But then it does create a lot of issues in terms of logistics as well.
Yeah, but this latest attack was farther from the shore than usual. Faruk, what does that mean?
Yeah,
Faruk, please.
Oh, yes. Okay. Previously, these attacks were taking place near the coastline or ports,
yes, or
in anchorage. But we see that this attack was almost 200 miles away from the coastline. And this shows that pirates' capability to reach the open seas have been increased by time. So they are increasing their capabilities not only to accessing to faraway ships, but also using some kind of technological equipments. For example, in this specific case, they used a kind of welding machine or industrial mobile saw in order to take away the hatch door inside the ship.
Yes.
So the pirates are also improving their techniques and tactics by time, and it shows that they can access 250 miles away from the coast. But it's impossible to keep this far from the coastline because ships use it in this area because of their mutual trades in that area.
All right. It seems that we need a unified approach to solve this problem. Gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberkaş. If you've got any comments, follow us and tweet us at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.